Hi, I'm Kristine Madera, author of God and Drag, and I'm here today with Henry Sullivan, who is the author of Colosseum, and we're here every other Friday talking about whatever sparks our interest over the previous 2 weeks. And so today we're talking about the absurd reality of living in an empire. And this was Henry's idea, and we haven't really talked much about why, about the origin of his idea. So I actually want to start by asking Henry why he chose this topic and to begin to move us into that conversation, if you're ready, Henry.
Yes, I am. I am. I'm multitasking here, but yes, I
I
am.
know.
so, um, so the way this came about is I was listening to yet another conversation about prediction markets, and
Hmm.
I've heard multiple conversations about Kalshi and Poly Market, and I already knew that you can bet on all sorts of things on these markets. But in this particular conversation, they happened to mention that there were people betting on when the war was going to start, targets
Hmm.
that are hit in the war, targets that the U.S. will hit and Israel will hit. And it occurred to me for some reason, hearing it during that conversation, the absurdity of being in a situation where you have, because the other thing that I've heard people talk about with these prediction markets is that they're targeting young men specifically because they know that given maturity levels and so on, that these young men are less likely to have control in terms of, because they're basically gambling. And so
Hmm.
they're much more likely to basically lose a lot of their money. And so these companies like Kalshi and Polymarket are targeting these young men, and they're getting either addicted to these prediction markets or they're losing a lot of money. And so you
Hmm.
have this group of people betting on events that people in those places can lose their life, from. And so they're treating events like life and death events as if it's a game. And yet these same young men probably are not going to be able to afford to buy a home. And
Hmm.
like either they or their kids or their grandkids are going to literally live on a planet that's burning. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, just the absurdity of that, where you have this situation where you have the immorality of treating these life and death events as a game, but the people who are playing that absurd game are also suffering from the same imperial, structure that the people who are on the other end of these events are suffering. And that's how I came up with the idea. If that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Um, and I think you definitely have, excuse me, a point with certainly the absurdity of the situation, where we have people, and actually, they've been finding more and more people who have either the ability to change events or initiate events or have inside information on those events, making those bets. And so when it's a skewed market anyway, it has nothing to do with what they were saying about being able to predict reality or what's going to happen. That they were kind of saying that this was a good thing for. Well, we're using this as like crowdsourcing what's going to happen in reality. And there used to be a something that I forget what it was called, some kind of a bot thing that was around for a while, it probably still is, where they kind of retroactively were able to look and see what the popular chatter was, and then it kind of predicted supposedly 9/11 and other things, but you couldn't really tell it beforehand. It was more like you could see in retrospect, and I don't remember the name of that. But this is one of those things that instead of using the wisdom of crowds to be able to kind of predict events, it's more like using using people to make money off of events that some people know about and can control. And my fear with this is, especially with agentic AI and some other things, that if you are smart about making bets and you have ways to be able to push the levers of those events, that you can you can predict something on the market and then you can make it happen so that you make money. And that would so skew reality if it's not already happening, to be able to not just bet on things that are going to happen, but bet and then force things that are going to happen, usually not in something that is going to be beneficial to anybody, because most of these things are pretty destructive that are being bet upon.
Exactly. Well, I mean, that's exactly what's happening. I mean, I'm sure you've heard about the scandal where well, I don't. It's weird to even call it a scandal because you have like a guy who manages or is connected to the teleprompter used in
Oh,
the White
yeah.
House, and how he was basically betting on what people were going to say, and that
Yeah.
pales in comparison to the. And I reluctantly, I don't like the word market manipulation. To me, it seems more like collaboration is what's going
Yeah.
on when it comes to the oil markets and the stock market and so on. So I
Yeah.
mean, whatever money that guy who's connected to the teleprompter was making, it pales in comparison to the money that other people are making doing exactly what you're saying, which is they're using information about events that are life or death events for thousands or millions of people.
Hmm.
They're profiting from those events.
Yeah.
So it's taking the notion of war being a racket to a whole nother level.
Hmm.
But you know, like I said, that's what occurred to me, or what triggered the idea of the absurdity of living in an empire. Now, there was a time, I think I mentioned this to you, that I haven't, most of my life I didn't buy the whole idea that America was an empire. And
Hmm.
the reason is because, and I know we talked before we actually went live about how, well, empires have never been a situation where, you know, the vast majority of the people benefit in the same way that a small group at the top are
Hmm.
benefiting from the imperial structure. I
Right.
get that. Um, but even because of that, I just felt like I didn't really believe that the US was in a position where we could literally do whatever we wanted to do and like the world would not react or push back on that really. Seriously push back. And it's not until now that I realize it, like especially like when I heard about the woman connected to the International Criminal Court and how the US just basically cut off her access to her money. So I saw an
Hmm.
interview with her where she described how I think she was going to trying to get on a subway or something, and her card wouldn't work. So of course, you
Wow.
know, she basically is calling around and like just trying to find out, and she found out that day that she could not spend any money because she was cut off from the global banking system. And that to me is what an empire is able to do.
Hmm.
Um, and we haven't really, like, you know, no one's suffered any consequences for that. And Rubio right now is trying to destroy the International Criminal Court.
Hmm.
And the only thing that you really see in terms of other governments reacting is you see comments about that's wrong, or you know, we need a rules based international order. I mean, all they can really do is complain. And so to me, that is what an empire is able to do. It doesn't really matter whether we're good actors or bad actors. The rest of the world just has to deal with us. And now, since we're essentially bad actors, you know, that kind of proves that we are an empire.
Well, I think we were structurally an empire anyway. We just kind of couched it in nice things, that we like to play certain games and on the world stage in more amicable ways than we do now. And we had certain
Hmm.
friends on the world stage that we do not have now, and or that's those relationships are being strained. And we're making friends with other actors who are more on the destructive side. So we've kind of switched sides. I don't think we were ever not okay. I think since World War II ended, we sort of escalated into our empire phase, and we
Hmm.
always were able to exert that kind of pressure. We just did it quietly and behind the scenes. And now we're doing it out front and in obvious ways without any worries about repercussions. where a lot of the
Right.
repercussions in the past might have been behind the scenes through the State Department, negotiations that we never really saw. And now it's all just out there for anybody to see. But to me, what's happening now are things that have always happened, but to a lesser degree. They're just out in the open, so that now we're confronted with seeing them in ways that we were not confronted with before because we were always considered ourselves the good guys.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's true, and I think it does date back to basically after the Second World War. So, I mean, I agree with you. It seems to me, though, that the infrastructure of that imperial power really resided more in our dominance over the global financial system than anything else. I mean, yes, we have bases all around the world, but to me, it seems as though Iran is kind of showing how, like, there are limits to that kind of power,
Yeah.
especially now with drone technology and so on. But but yeah, there really are no limits to a dominance over the financial system. Because
No,
like I said, you just have one person. You have one person who, like, is targeted, and
mhm.
now I don't know how long it took her to rewrite that situation. I mean, I'm assuming she's able to spend money now. But can you imagine if all of a sudden you have money, but if all of a sudden you're not able to spend money? It's just
I
that
think that's
clear. It's like,
yeah, I mean, that's to me has been looming for quite a little while. As things get more and more integrated in things and the ability to use power and leverage to pressure, the institutions where you have your money to stop that, is kind of something that's sort of been creeping in for a while. And one of the things that people were worried about with China and their social credit system, that they had this idea, and I don't know the full extent of the idea, but you basically got rewarded for being a good person and penalized for being a bad person, more or less. But since everything was connected through this app that also connected your financial data, the big scare was, oh, then if you did something bad, the government could cut off your money. And when I heard that, I thought, yeah, but that could probably happen anyway, even if it's not all consolidated under like a Big Brother style system. If it's
mhm.
consolidated when at the leverage of power, I mean that obviously that could happen, and the more things get consolidated, the more likely that is to happen. Where it's just you flip a switch. I mean, somebody's saying what you don't want them to say, and it's like, well, all of a sudden they're not allowed to live. They're not allowed to access their money. Their house might get repossessed. Like all kinds of different things. Like I kind of see that as the direction that we're moving forward into if we continue this retribution, and control and enforcement sort of path that we've been tumbling down.
Yeah, no, no. I mean, I can't help but think about flock cameras, and I know we thought about We talked about flock cameras the last 2 weeks ago. It's the same sort of thing. I don't know if you've seen any coverage of the kind of stuff that's happening with those cameras, but I saw one news segment where they interviewed a woman who, I think she's blonde, and she happened
Mm-hmm.
to drive past an area where a blonde woman actually did like steal a package or something like that. And so they showed. I mean, since so many communities, like, she had a camera, a security camera in her house, so she had a recording of her interaction with this cop who came to her house to accuse her of stealing somebody's package. And so in the recording, it shows her where the cop is just like, don't tell me it's not you. You're wasting your time because we have you on video and so on and so forth. And the woman is just like, why are you so certain I was at this place at this time? And he's like, because we have it on video. And so they showed the video that he was talking about, and it was a woman about her height. She was also same hair color, and she had a baseball cap or something, I think. Um, but it just so happens that this woman, I mean, again, it looked like she was in a suburban house, suburban community. Um, Can you hear me? All of a sudden, I
Yeah,
lost
all
you.
of a sudden you lost your, like it's like the power blipped or something, and usually it's blipping on my side. But yeah, the same thing happened before where the sound changed and it's coming out of a different place.
Ah, okay, okay. But what I was saying is that it just so happened that she had a bunch of security footage of her day, you know, that she was able to go through and like defend herself in court. So
They
she
took
has
it, they
security
got it
footage.
all the way to court.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh
They
my
brought it
God.
all. It went all the way to court. Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
and I mean, and so the stuff that she presented in court was like it just so happened she got the security footage of the store that she actually went to. So she drove near this area, and that's the reason why it was almost like a triangulation thing where they had flock cameras that showed her car driving on a street that's
Uh-huh.
near the house, and the house had a security camera, and that security camera showed the woman who actually took captured this woman stealing a package or something.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so they put the two things together and said, well, you're blonde, you're driving on this street at this time. And so
Wow.
they just kind of concluded, they felt like they had a good case that she was the person who was in that security footage. But she had footage showing that she kept going and she stopped at a store and she had her,
Uh-huh.
footage of herself shopping at the store and so on, and footage of her getting back to her house because again, her house had a security system,
Oh,
and so her thing was is you need to have your own digital defense. Whereas a lot of people feel like, well, why should we have to go through this anyway? Why not just solve crimes the old-fashioned way, where okay, you've got a video of this woman stealing a package. Great, that's something that's new. But just because this other woman who kind of looks like her drove near the house at the same time
mhm.
doesn't mean that she did it.
Yeah.
You
But
know.
whenever there's some kind of new technology, like everything with law enforcement in particular, if there's a technology that they can take advantage of, the adoption of that technology becomes not abusive, but it has overreach. A lot of the stuff, like even that with that bite mark technology, like that for 20 years or something. Though somebody came up with, oh, you can do this bite mark thing. So if somebody ate an apple and they put it in this bin, or somebody bit somebody on the arm, you could identify the person based on the bite mark. And for a long time, like that was actually something that held up in court. This whole bite technology, but it's been disproved over and over again how it's not as reliable or not actually reliable, and it took a long time for that to get dismissed. But at the time, like for anything that involved a bite, oh, we've got this new technology, and it is, it's perfect. It's always going to work. We can totally rely on it. All these things, everything from DNA to bite stuff to now with this video, different things that they seize upon that as a new way of enforcing laws, that is actually kind of a shortcut, because you're right, they don't solve it the old-fashioned way, and the evidence provided is given a um, inappropriate level of legitimization legitimacy than it should be. So that's alarming with the flat cameras, because I don't want to have to be, we all shouldn't have to self-surveil with cameras to prove that we're not committing crimes. I mean, that's just insane.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that like I said, there are plenty of people who agree with you. And
Yeah.
so, fortunately, these the way that they set up uh, the arrangements with Flock are yearly arrangements, and so
Mhm.
they signed a year lease or whatever, a year contract with these companies. And so people are basically demanding that either they cancel the contract or they let the contract lag. They don't renew it.
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
and um, and as is the case with a couple of key issues, this is not a left, right, red, blue kind of thing.
Don't
It's
fight
just
with
like,
it.
yeah, exactly. People just don't want it. They just don't
Yeah.
want that. Um, and so like I said, is I understand that that empires in the past have been such that very few people actually benefited from from uh, the the spoils of the empire. Um, and I'm not saying that I should be benefiting from America as an empire. But what I'm saying is it's just absurd to be in this country, to be in this situation. Because I guess the other thing that we should say for the benefit of people, for foreigners living outside of the U.S., is plenty of American citizens disagree and don't like what our government is doing just as much
Yeah.
as
A
I
majority.
saw.
Yeah.
Yeah, a majority, as a matter of fact. And I saw like some recent polling shows that you have these polling outfits that ask people questions like, which country do you think is the biggest threat in the world? And the U.S. has risen to the top for a lot of for a lot of people,
Imagine.
and there are plenty of Americans who actually agree with that,
Yeah.
and aren't happy about that at all. So that's part of the absurdity of living in an empire.
Yeah, and when we were talking before we got on, you brought up too the whole idea that um, you know we're living in an empire, and yet a lot of people can't afford a house or can't afford
Right.
to live or can't afford all of these things. And so my point was really that like you said, that empires were never set up for the majority of the people to benefit. They're basically set up for the perpetuation of the empire. But when you live through the high point of an empire, which both of us were brought up at a point where we were still close to that high point of that empire,
Mm-hmm.
where you had investment in schools and like unquestioned investment in schools and unquestioned
Right.
investment in infrastructure, and the idea was to bring a broad level of living security to a large number of people because that helped to legitimize the government and what the government was doing and our presence in the world and all of that stuff that we were doing. And then once those things begin to, or once the government doesn't need, or the empire, I suppose, empires and governments can be a little bit different, but once the empire no longer needs as many people to preserve the power of the empire, then those things are withdrawn. And so we've gotten used to this idea that government is, part of government is to, although it is in our Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, the welfare of the people, to, support the welfare of the people, the general welfare, I guess, is what's in the Declaration of Independence, but to help the benefit and provide for the well-being of the people. So that's just kind of part of the talking points that we were brought up with. They were never really part of an empire. It's like a contract thing that we get those things as long as it benefits the empire. When it stops benefiting the empire, those things go away because they're expensive or inconvenient, or education can make people ask questions, and all kinds of different things, or too many people with too many rights cause problems. And so then as those things wane, what we've come to expect as the public good that we expect from our government is no longer part of that equation. And that's where it feels like the rug's been pulled out for a lot of people. But if you're younger, you weren't really brought up in that part. Like you didn't really have that same expectation. Your parents might, but you kind of see usually a little bit more clear-eyed that social contract was never really a contract. It was just, it was an exchange of the times.
Well, I mean that actually leads to another thing that has occurred to me about our situation right now. Is it seems to me like if you're in your 20s, what you're seeing is the mockery of what you just described. So you just described a country where there's a general respect for our court system, and
Hmm.
so when someone says that American jurisprudence is the envy of the world, nobody's really going to jump up and say, oh, really, give me a break, and then criticize it. When right now you have basically a coven of bloggers on the Supreme Court whose corruption is being executed in a way where they actually are writing decisions as if they don't understand how American law works. So,
Hmm.
like, they'll take cases when the plaintiff doesn't have standing to even bring the case,
Yeah.
or they'll say that, I don't see any evidence of prejudice. When in our digital age, not only is there evidence of prejudice, there's an abundance of
Yeah.
evidence of prejudice. And so but they're doing it for corrupt reasons,
Yeah.
but that, but allowing that corruption to stand is turned the Supreme Court into a mockery of American jurisprudence. I mean, it seems less like a
Hmm.
court and more like, like I said, a coven of bloggers who are just making it up as they go along. So the rest of the federal judicial system might actually be the exact opposite of that. It might actually be sterling and it's something that is respected around the world. But our highest court
Yeah.
seems to have six people who look like the worst lawyers in the United States of America because they don't seem like they can
Hmm.
pass a bar exam by the way they're actually acting. And that's true in other areas. I mean, if you look at, you know, uh, our military was respected because not only do we have the biggest military footprint in the world, but we also are basically considered to have a professional military, a highly educated military, so on and so forth. And now you have Pete Hegseth, who literally lowered the standard of leadership in the military down to doing push ups. Why? Because that's a standard he can reach.
Right.
So it's like a mockery. It's like a mockery
Yeah.
of the whole idea of the professional U.S. military.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's the military. Now we have the Supreme Court. Those are two examples. Another example is the stock market. You've got
Yeah.
the stock market where you have seven companies that are passing around billions of dollars of debt, like frat boys passing around a joint. I mean, and so like the stock market has been criticized is basically a casino. Now you
Hmm.
cannot make the argument that that criticism is wrong. And
Yeah.
so all of these different systems are, the people at the top are making such a mockery of all these different institutions that we look less like an empire sometimes and more like a circus. And I think that is, I mean, even if you have metrics like GDP, employment rate, and
Uh-huh.
stuff like that, that look decent compared to China and other places, there's no way in the world that these things that I just mentioned will not cause America's decline. It's just not possible. You can't allow that level of corruption and not suffer from it. I just don't see how you own.
No, you can't. But it's interesting because I was an exchange student in Australia when I was 17, and I did a semester abroad in London where we had some interesting interactions there. And I also went traveled a lot in my young 20s where I met people from all over the world. And I had some really interesting wake up call conversations with a lot of people who knew a lot more about America than I did. Like I took my civics class. I grew up here. I had, a grandfather in local politics and things like that. But, it was all very much the flag waving rah rah and not like overly patriotic like we have now where it's really performative patriotic. It was really just like, this is the reality we live in. We're so lucky to live in this reality. We're the good guys. We do nice things in the world. Everybody loves us. Isn't it great? And I had people who were calling me on that, and like even in high school, and they were saying, what about this? 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 This is what Reagan's really doing. This is what's happening over here, and I was like,
Right.
so early on, like my political waking up was when I was overseas, and basically people who were paying attention at a different level saying this is the hypocrisy that we see. This is what we're really seeing is happening in the world. And like, how do you explain it? And I was like, I really can't explain that. And it made me question a lot of things, which is why I look at things in a different eye than I used to. And I don't give us the benefit of the doubt. Like I was brought up believing that we should give ourselves the benefit of the doubt because even if we do things that aren't so great, at least we're better than everybody else. You know, like that's kind of the song and dance that we're told. And I was never super, patriotic style person, but I just sort of absorbed that as sort of my natural default thought process until I got to other places and I was like, oh, yeah. So if I really paid attention to that, like that Iran Contra thing, yeah, there's some questionable stuff there. And, some of this other stuff that we've done in the world, some questionable things. And even we talked about this off camera before. I think where the overthrow of the Shah of Iran and the oil, like how the U.S. was really integral in trying to control Iranian oil and control the government so they can control the oil and all of this that we were sold. Oh, they're just taking over the oil companies and kicking people out, and aren't they so bad, and aren't we so good, and we're just going to leave, and they take our hostages, and we're the good guys, and blah blah blah. So everything was always couched in us being the good guys and other people being bad guys, and without much discussion about the underlying fundamentals of those arguments.
No, there's plenty of evidence. And I mean, yeah, when you say the overthrow, you're talking about in the 50s where the U.S. government overthrew the democratically elected president
Oh yeah,
of
that
Iran
one.
and then installed the Shah.
And then it well, the Shah, sorry. And then when the yeah, and then the overthrow of the Shah by Khomeini. So or that whole
That's
process.
right. That's right. And they
Very
did it
interesting.
because the democratically elected president wanted to not privatize, wanted to take over the oil reserves. Take it from
Yeah,
these companies, these foreign companies.
yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and there is plenty of evidence of a lot of bad things that the U.S. did all over the world. Um, Now, I have grown to appreciate the. It's not necessarily the other side, but there are people who are. I hear people cautioning, um, like getting too kind of wound up in this sort of negative navel gazing, where we go from, like you said, where the U.S. is all good to the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
is all bad. Because
Which
if
is
you
also
assume,
dangerous. Yeah.
well, if you assume that you're all bad, then I mean, what are you fighting for? It's like,
Right,
you
right,
know,
yeah. No, and I don't assume that we're all bad, but like anything, I mean, I can love myself and want to see my blind spots and improve myself and become a better person. And I think oftentimes what's missing in our conversation about our country is that we are either, and I think we had this off camera as well before, we're either blinded to anything bad that we have done. So we always want to follow that good story and pat ourselves on the back and all that. Or we get involved in this. Everything we do is bad. Since we do bad things, sometimes everything we do is bad and suspect when we're one actor in the world and there's a lot of actors in the world doing a lot of questionable things. But there's not much room in the middle, now or ever, to really talk about our shortcomings and how to improve upon them, and how to make us a better actor in the world and a better country and better people within that country, that isn't cleaved in half by the rosy glasses and the everything is horrible people.
well,
So
there is kind of a through line that I think helps you to not see it that way, which is if you follow the money, if you basically look at wealth, and I'm talking
hmm
about corporations and now like just the glaringly obvious billionaire class.
yeah,
If you look at it that way, I mean, even going back to what happened in Iran back in the 50s, that was all about oil companies basically trying to keep their dominance over another country's oil
yeah,
reserves,
yeah,
trying to keep their control over another country's resources. That's what that was all about. That had nothing to do with democracy. That had
right.
nothing to do with anything related to what was happening in the United States of America. If
hmm
anything, there was a recognition that, well, the only way that we can kind of do bad things in other places is if we make it look like we're trying to do good things at home. So, it's like we're going to try harder and harder to live up to the words in our founding
Mhm.
documents, so that we can so that no one really challenges us on the things that we're doing in South America or the Middle East
Right.
or in Asia or whatever. I mean, so if anything, that was a situation, but you can almost always trace it back to money or
Yeah.
wealth,
Yeah.
private
Ah,
interest. You can
yeah.
almost always do it that way. And I don't know about you, I am not using a we when it comes to, Elon Musk. I mean, Elon
Oh,
Musk and me, we're not a we. That's him. It's like I'm not going to add a we. So to me, when people say, aren't you patriotic? Well, how is it patriotic to be supportive of these corporations? I
no.
mean,
Mhm.
they're American corporations, but they're global entities. These
Yeah.
corporations have like international footprints,
Mhm.
and we're talking about like individuals. I mean, when it comes to billionaires, they have more wealth in the bank or more wealth on paper than
Yeah.
like 30 or 40 countries.
Yeah.
And so to criticize them to me has absolutely nothing to do with how I feel about the United States of America. They are not the United States of America. They're something completely different. And I mean, you can trace a lot of our problems,
Mhm.
especially now with all of the media that we have, all of the information. You got so many different people who are angry about what's happening that now people feel compelled to get the truth out, to get the word out.
Yeah,
You know,
thankfully.
yeah, exactly. And so I think that sort of solves your, is America all bad, all good? Because right now it's pretty easy to trace it all back to money,
Well,
which most of us
yeah,
don't
so and
have.
it froze up on me there, so I couldn't hear what all of you said, but yeah, I guess because when I see it on the news, it's usually the all good, the all bad thing. But yeah, I do see your point
That's
with
true.
that. But in reality, over the last, well, actually, since America was not so much right away founded, but certainly the development of America and the railroads and the Industrial Revolution, I mean, the government often sided with industry. And
Right.
so, I think they're intertwined in a way that has been really supportive of industry over the people. And so I don't think you can give the government a pass because a lot of things that were done in the name of commerce or profit, because the hands are in the till together
Right.
with a lot of that. But and it just makes it sound like I don't like my country, but I do. I love my country, but I think we can do better, and that's what it irritates me when we are fighting against each other instead of trying to find a path forward and working together to move on this path forward. Because we are hitting these markers of a decline of an empire, which gives us the opportunity to reimagine who we can be and begin to move in that direction rather than just like watch it all fall apart, or move into authoritarianism, which is another way that empires end too. They sort of fracture and go into authoritarianism and then dissolve and then reorganize in some way or another, in a smaller version of their form.
Yeah. I mean, and you said that I was coming in and out. I guess the way that I would sum it up is to me it's not about whether you like your country. What I say is I don't like billionaires. Straight up, I don't like billionaires. And I know that I feel very strongly that you can't have billionaires and democracy or anything,
Mhm.
any semblance of democracy. You just can't have
Yeah.
both. So to me, you don't have to. You can try and like throw that whole anti-American thing at me, but I'm clear about the fact that I don't like billionaires, and I'm clear about the fact that I connect
Oh
them to a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
the problems that we have. So that's the way I look at it. But another thing about the whole thing that you were saying, I mean, uh, I've heard conversations about like I didn't know that the founding documents that we always talk about would develop over the course of like 20 years. It's not like
Mhm.
when we think of the founding, the founding fathers and all this kind of stuff, we kind of think of it as um, almost in modern terms, where okay, we need to get this together. So
Mhm.
let's let's um, let's eh, let's schedule a week to sit down and work this out. And
Yeah,
that's a new thing, and even now it's not really realistic. It takes a lot longer than a week to do
yeah,
anything significant. But that's kind of the way we think of it. It's like, okay, they got together, put their cell phones out down, and kind of hammered it out. When really it took something like 20 years. And I heard like an historian talking about how the motivation to come up with these documents and to develop this system was not a love of particular ideas necessarily. What they were saying is you had a situation in some states where you had a large number of people in debtors prisons,
hmm,
because they couldn't afford. I mean, a lot of people own farms or whatever, and so they would have like the they would find themselves in situations where they couldn't afford to pay the banks back for the money that they lent them to manage
hmm,
their farms, and so they put them in prison. And there were some states where the states were very lenient to the farmers, and so they didn't put them in prison, and so that angered the banks. And so it was this problem of having this situation where people would wind up in prison. Large numbers of people would wind up in prison. What do you do with these people? You're eventually going to have
yeah,
another revolution, of
hmm,
poor people and working people against the wealthy
yeah.
people. And so that's kind of over the course of a lot of negotiations and just back and forth. That's how we developed these documents. It wasn't, and in a way, and this particular historian, his thesis is that the American system isn't designed to protect to protect rights for,
Yeah,
for for your average person. What it is designed to protect wealth. It's
it is.
designed that way.
Property specifically, but yeah, wealth, because that was the primary form of property back in the day.
Primary form of
You know,
property, exactly.
and I touched a little bit of on that in my Substack post on that, and this was back I think the 3rd of July, so right before we celebrated our 250th birthday. And my point in that essay was really that we celebrate the brouhaha, we celebrate like that we declared independence, and these are our rights and we're going to go to war and all this kind of stuff. But that the structure of that government didn't work, and so they had to go back to the drawing board
Right.
and create another government, and they create another government that worked. So it was, we had the country was built on the idea that you need to relook at things that aren't working, and yet we have
Mm-hmm.
entrenched in our system this almost we've almost deified the ideas of our founding documents, that we can never change them. We have to like anticipate, well, what would George Washington have done in this situation, and try to figure that out and try to apply everything to those founding documents, instead of saying, okay, so what we started with really isn't applicable to the 21st century, and so how do we revise these things so that we're able to act in 21st century issues and limitations and circumstances and rights and the assumption of rights, because they're a very different assumption of rights now than they were back in the day, and
Mm-hmm.
set that out as a contract moving forward. And then maybe you put in, like, every 50 years we revise, we look at this again and we tweak it and we revise it, and we and build that flexibility into the system, because it was never designed to be like its own enshrined document. It was designed to be a working thesis of government that needed to be revised, or should be revised, as things on the ground change.
Yeah, but I think you know the answer as to why we do that, and
Yeah.
it's basically our culture. We have
Hmm.
a convenience oriented culture where we just kind of it's like, has it why isn't somebody taking care of that? Why am I dealing with this?
Yeah.
Why can't I do that? Why is this taking so long? I mean, that's the culture that we have. And so I think that this whole, it's almost like that our culture is such that, I've said it before, people who pay attention to, like you mentioned, your civics education and all this kind of stuff, and then you went abroad and people had all this information that it seemed like you didn't have, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's because in our society, knowing anything about your government, that's a subculture of the
Hmm.
broader culture. People who pay attention to it, people who want to, people who are interested in it, people who want to participate in it, and so on. Most people just want it to work. They
Yeah.
they want it. They want to pay attention to the things that they're interested in, and let it just streets are just paved. You know,
Hmm.
crime. The order is just maintained. I mean that's what most people want. And honestly, I never think about electricity or the electric grid or the communication system. I never think about that stuff. And I've known engineers who are
Hmm.
just like, yeah, you should think about that stuff. Or,
Yeah.
I mean, everybody who's interested in a particular thing feels like everybody should know is at least the baseline of what they know about
Yeah.
that thing. But in our society, there's an expectation that most things are just going to work, and it shouldn't require anything from me for it to work. And I think that's a lot of the problem in this. And we're in a situation now that things have gotten so bad that
Hmm.
now more and more people are just like, well, I have to pay attention. Because if I
Yeah.
don't pay attention, then my job is at jeopardy. Or if I don't pay attention, then my family is in jeopardy. Or if I don't pay attention, then my health care is in jeopardy. I mean, and from everything that I'm seeing, economists are basically expecting 401ks to be in jeopardy next month. Um, so I think that's really what's going on, is that people are being forced to know things about this stuff, to understand these things. It's not that they are going to go back and learn the things that you were talking about, the history that you were talking about, but they will all of a sudden start paying attention if the stock market, crashes. They will pay attention at that point.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's another explanation that goes along with that, because that seems a little bit of more of a more current day explanation. Because if you look back to the earlier days, there was a lot more civic discussion because democracy was new. There was a lot more civic discussion about how it should work on local levels and state levels and things like that, for better or for worse. But there was more engagement with that, and then more now we're all so busy that, and we're so used to convenience that you're correct. We just expect everything to work. But I think one of the issues of holding on to those founding documents in terms of making them kind of our origin story is because we don't, they are kind of our origin story as a country. And if you look at a country like France or England, or even places that would have had tribal cultures like, tribes in Saudi Arabia and Africa, and other places where they have a longer um, collective memory of themselves, then they might have different levels of story about who they are and how they come to be and how they solve problems and how they move forward. We really have a group of disparate people. Sometimes people call it a melting pot or a tossed salad or whatever it is, but all kinds of different people coming together. And our only origin stories are sort of, the revolution and the rah-rah and the founding documents and the Mayflower. And so if you have something like the founding documents and those are changeable, how does that change our origin story and who we are and our culture and what it means to be an American? So I think there's a real strong tie to that, as something that gives us an anchor, that if we were to change, we'd have to reconfigure what that anchor is. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we need to look at what really does anchor us together versus looking at documents that were written 250 years ago and say, well, we have to stay true to those because that's all we've got.
Yeah, I know I understand what you're saying, but I don't know if I've said it in conversations with you, but I firmly believe that Americans generally are not going to feel good about their country until politicians, the leaders, figure out ways to describe the United States of America as a moral superhero.
Hmm.
And I don't think that's going to happen soon, but I do believe. I bet you once you stop hearing so much doom and gloom,
Mhm.
Which is what you hear most of the time, nothing but doom and gloom. If you pay attention to politics, it's all bad news.
Yeah.
Um, and it's about to get much much worse. I mean, so I want to acknowledge that things are about to get really really bad. But on the other side of that catastrophe, I really believe that once leaders figure out ways to connect, how we have violence is kind of fundamental to our culture, to
Mhm.
connect that to a morally good purpose, which is what a superhero is, right?
Mhm.
Once leaders figure out how to do that in terms of the United States of America to describe the country, that's when Americans will start feeling good about the United States again. That's what I personally believe. Because I don't think you're going to be able to craft a story that will make a broad swath of Americans feel good about the United States if you root that story in the past. I really don't think so. I
Okay.
think you have to root that story not only in the future, but also in our current culture, which really doesn't have anything to do with equality and civil rights, and it doesn't have anything to do with that. Our current culture is basically fun loving. That's our current culture. I mean, Americans are kind of doom and gloom right now because we're all under a lot of pressure. But if
Mhm.
you lift the economic and social pressures that we're under right now, all of this fighting and contention that we have right now, if you lift that, what Americans are going to do is play. Americans are going to play sports, they're going to play video games, they're going to watch movies, and they're going to take all of that play very, very, very seriously. That's what Americans do, generally speaking, right?
Mhm.
And so that's why I say the only way that you're going to make a bunch of kids, basically, like civically speaking kids, feel good about a country is if you make that country a very powerful being that's doing good stuff. And so that's, I mean, I know it may sound crazy, but that's my take on it.
Well, I think, that's kind of the country I was sort of brought up in a sense that, we're doing good things and you can relax and enjoy your life because good things are happening behind the scenes. You don't have to pay too much close attention to that. But I think people now, because of what we've been coming through and all of the things that are coming to light, that whatever we anchor that story to has to be more than a story about us doing good. Like we have to tie our actions and our outcomes to that story in a fundamental way so that it's not just like one more sugarcoating. It becomes something that you say, yes, we're doing good things, and these are the good things that we're doing, and this is the stuff that we've done in the past, and this is what we're doing to correct those things, that we are being a force for good, and this is the proof that we are giving. And you can look under any rug you want to, and you're going to begin to see at least seeds of that proof.
I'm
So I,
smiling. I'm smiling because you kind of remind me of my ex-wife. Obviously, you're not into superheroes,
no, I'm
and so
not into
and yeah,
sorry.
it's obvious you're not because when I say superheroes, if you watch almost any superhero movie, they're doing a lot of stuff. They're flying around and landing
Sure.
and
Yeah.
like lifting this and saving that. And so I get what you're saying. I mean, yes, I totally agree with you. Yeah, you're going to have to connect it to doing things, but that's what I
Yeah.
meant by like a moral superhero. It's like,
All right. So
you
you
know,
have the good Batman and you have the bad Batman. You got the dark Batman and you've got the light
yeah, you have the
Batman.
dark.
So,
Exactly. So maybe you're
so
from. Did you see the Dark Knight? Did you see the Dark Knight?
years ago, yeah, I saw the Dark Knight. But
It sounds like.
I grew up with the TV Batman. So, like
Oh,
the funny Batman and Robin
pow,
and the
bam.
Pow and the Batman. I mean, I thought it was stupid, but it was just, I mean, that's what was on after school. And when I could sneak around and watch TV after school, that's what I would watch.
Okay, okay.
But yeah, I mean, the superhero movies, because there's not even Iron Man and stuff. I mean, they go out and they do things, and I like it when they show them as actual conflicted beings,
Hmm.
because that really shows a true, well-rounded nature of things. But
Okay,
yeah, I'm
so
not a
so you're
big into superheroes.
yeah, obviously, because what you're basically saying is that you're more into Marvel than DC. I mean, you don't realize it, but that's basically what you just said.
All right,
So
then
you're more a Wolverine, kind of person than Superman kind of thing. But
Wait, so
we're
okay, because you went out on me. So why am I a Marvel person instead of a DC person? Tell me that again.
well, because Marvel actually does play on that idea that human beings are much more complicated, whereas
Okay.
DC is a much cleaner. I mean, obviously, I'm a Marvel person too. So like Wolverine and Mystique and all these characters, those kind of people make more sense. They're powerful, and they don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily use their powers for good. They kind of, I mean, in some cases, they do good kind of by accident. It's like
Mm-hmm.
Wolverine might be in the way of a villain trying to harm someone, and since his nature, he's just indestructible.
Mm-hmm.
And so he kind of saves the person simply because
That
running into
happens.
him will not kill him. And I know this is kind of going geeky about like
Okay.
superheroes and everything, but that's exactly what I mean. It's like you have this sort of fun-loving society, and I really believe if you really think about Americans, if you think about the biggest circle that you can draw around most Americans, you're drawing a circle around the sports fans, the movie lovers, the video game players. That those are all the people that will fit in that big circle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so someone like you is kind of on the edge of the circle because you're not into all that stuff, you know. Um, but you were in the minority. I'm sorry to tell you, but you were
And then, all right. Well, I've
seriously in the
been called
minority.
so by everybody everywhere all the time. So I will own that. But the other
You
thing
own
I
that,
think
okay?
Americans are is also have a generosity of spirit and a sense of they like to have a mission or a sense of mission and purpose, and they have a generosity of spirit and they like to help.
Well,
Something
see,
happens and they like to help.
well,
And
that's the superhero right there. That's what I'm
okay, so
saying.
if you simply have the fun without having that deeper sense of meaning and purpose and having a path of doing of have being purposeful and meaningful and doing good in the world and helping, that it's a missing piece because that's for a well-rounded superhero as a Marvel person, I will say that they need that sense of larger altruistic purpose in order to really feel good. So
Yes,
that's my
exactly. And basically what I'm saying is, I think the superhero is kind of like the motif in a sense.
Mhm.
But basically when you recast the United States as a country as what you just described, but add power to it, add
Mhm.
power and fun. I mean, I agree with you. There is a strong sense of wanting to do like having a productive purpose, like helping people and all that. I agree with you. I mean, we saw that in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
That's a lot of that was evident in Minneapolis. Um, but I think that to bring in the broadest group of people, you have to also add the other elements that you always see in our society, which is power, you
Mhm.
know, and fun. Those are the two things that also come along with that. That's why we're into sports and video games and movies and all this other kind of stuff. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think when you can recast the United States of America as that, and put it as something being that in the future, because
Mhm.
there's too much information out there. Even though most people don't pay attention to all the stuff that we were talking about, like if you say Kermit Roosevelt, most people have no idea what you're talking about. But if so, trying to there's too much information to try and root it in the past, as you were saying, as we
Mhm.
as we did for a long time, like the first 200 years of the country.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of the problem with the 250th. Is like there's just too much information to kind of muddy the waters. What we needed, instead of celebrate 250 looking back, is we needed 250 looking forward. So it should have been like the next 100 years. What are we going to
Mhm.
do in the next 100 years? But our politics are just too messed up to do that at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's
Yeah.
nobody out there that's in politics that is really talking that direction. Everything's really about, fighting each other right now versus I haven't seen anybody with a vision of the future that I get behind. There's some visions of the future that I find to be quite Handmaid's Tale out there that I really am not very much into. But I haven't heard anybody with and to characterize it or to whatever, or caricature it George H.W. Bush and his shining city on a hill and the thousand points of light and all of that. And it was kind of farcical when he was talking about it, but the idea that I think he was trying to get across, it was that we have a better future ahead of us, if we were able to focus on that future. Now, how they went about doing that, I wasn't particularly excited about, but nobody's talking in those terms right now that I'm seeing. I see conversations about trying to get people to forge that vision, before the 2028 election. But I don't know how well that's going to go.
Well, that's the reason why I say it's not going to happen until after that, because the 2028 election is going to be entirely about two things: billionaires and Israel. That's what the 2028 election is going to be about, because that's where all of the political energy is.
Hmm.
And so yeah, it's not going to be before 2028. It's going to have to be afterwards, like 2032 or something like that. Um, and again, you say you haven't heard anybody trying to putting forth a vision like that. And as you said that, I thought billionaires. That's the
I
reason.
said putting forth a vision that I want to get behind. There's people out there with visions that I'm like, yeah, check, no, I don't think so. Like that is not the kind of future that I really want. So nobody's putting out a vision for the future that is inclusive of everybody besides like the let's land on Mars and colonate Mars, and because that hasn't there's so much there to exploit. But I haven't heard a vision for the future that I think involves humanity and America as a subset of humanity into any kind of um, future that sounds at all interesting to me.
Hmm.
I mean, it all sounds very like, really? You're gonna do that? Well, okay. I'll check. I'll go do something else. Thank you very much. It's not something I'm gonna get behind. So I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting for the vision of the future that I can get on board with.
Okay.
That is for all of us and not just for a subset of people.
Hmm. Okay. I mean, yeah, it'd be nice if that shows up. We'll see. So it's.
Really, people sticking to it, I really am. I find that for as much as it says there's that old saying that may live in interesting times, and we do live in interesting times in the sense there's a whole lot going on. There's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of stuff happening. There's a lot of angst and things, but they're not very interesting times. It's the same thing over and over and over again, amplified in new ways, and it's just a predictable tedium. And I'd
Yeah,
really
yeah.
sit in something that is exciting and forward thinking rather than something that is just, same song, next verse. Like, what's the point? I don't get
Yeah, I totally agree. Things right now are not interesting. They just suck. I mean,
it.
that's just the way it is. They just
Yeah,
suck.
yeah,
They're
they
not
do.
interesting. Yeah,
No.
exactly. So on that optimistic note,
Yeah, all right, very good.
um, so yeah, we do this every 2 weeks, and hopefully, I gotta drag this over. Join us 2 weeks from now, and again, we don't know what we're going to talk about, but I'm sure we'll come up with something interesting, something that doesn't suck. Hopefully.
That's right. Something that we will have a vision for the future. I don't know. Something that doesn't suck.
Okay.
All
Bye,
right.
everybody.